Welcome to step 3 of our program, How to End Destructive Habits. And in this step, we're going to focus on strengthening the healthy brain circuitry. Now, you remember in the introductory video, I had talked about how this program is going to integrate the latest brain science, also the insights from the new field of health psychology, but it's all based on a foundation of timeless spiritual principles that give us a context for being able to understand how we can best heal the brain, overcome the urges, end the habits and addictions, and be able to achieve a life experience that is as God intended for us. And this is very important, to be able to bring God and spiritual realities into the conversation, in this case into the program. Because as I mentioned before, in our very kind of secularized society, and perhaps especially in healthcare and medicine, spiritual realities are kind of marginalized as being unscientific, and so we have a very kind of worldly view of health and healing, and yet it's completely untrue that there's no science. In fact, there's more and more science all the time, which is confirming the importance of acknowledging spiritual realities, the power of prayer. There's just so much now that is being understood through the latest brain science, brain scanning. So what we want to do is really take this out of the domain of just intellectual understanding. We want to really be able to access and tap the immense spiritual power that is available to us to help us to dismiss the urges, to not give in to the urges, and as a consequence of not acting on the urges, then they will fade and the habit will end. This has been the basis of the first two steps in the program. And here in step 3, we want to focus on some very simple ideas, but they carry such tremendous importance, because through these ideas, we actually can connect with God's power, with spiritual power, not just to have an intellectual understanding, but to really have insight and a deep knowledge and connection with wisdom, and utilize that wisdom and utilize that power to be able to overcome our destructive habits. One of my favorite people is Winston Churchill. And here in one of his speeches to the English people just prior to the Battle of Britain, where he talked about with all our might and with all our strength that God can give us. So he's acknowledging our dependency on God, on asking for all the strength that God can give us. And in such difficult, challenging times, and in many ways, fighting an addiction, fighting a destructive habit is a very, very challenging and potentially difficult situation. But if we can really, again, access that spiritual power and ask for all the strength that He can give us, we are then able to operate on a much more advantageous way to be free of the addictions and the habits. Now, I want to just address a slide that we saw earlier in step 1, where we talked about the concept of neuroplasticity, where there's actually a change in the circuitry of the brain, a kind of rewiring of the brain. And you recall at that time, in step 1, we talked about each time we let the urges come and go without acting on them. That's the key. Letting the urges come and go without acting on them. the destructive neurological circuits diminish and healthy circuits are strengthened. And Dr. Schwartz, in this quote, he says, by focusing attention away from negative behaviors and towards positive ones, patients were able to make permanent changes to their own neural pathways. And this is so important to understand. By focusing attention away from the negative and towards the positive. This is what we want to focus on in this particular step. In step 2, we talked about being able to dismiss the urge as we create separation between us and the urges and be able to dismiss them as just neurological garbage. In step 3 now, we want to put our focus of attention away from negative and onto the positive. And here we can see that, as Dr. Schwartz continues, quote, for it is a mental state, attention, that has the ability to direct neuroplasticity. In doing so, it has the ability to alter the very landscape of the brain, the very architecture and structure of the brain. By changing and shifting our attention, we can direct neuroplasticity and in a constructive, healing way affect the very landscape of the brain. He goes on to say, quote, since we know that firing a set of synapses, connections, again and again, makes them grow stronger, it follows that attention is an important ingredient for neuroplasticity. The way an individual willfully focuses attention has systemic, meaning widespread effects on brain function, amplifying activity, in particular brain circuits. So this is the key here, neuroplasticity, using our attention to benefit us and promote the healing of the brain. And what our attention needs to be focused on is, in general, the positive mindset, the positive attitudes, forgiveness and gratitude. But perhaps the most important thing to put our attention on is the power from God himself. To increase healthy brain circuitry, God's wisdom and power and influence is available to us. It's just kind of playing in the background of our mind, drowned out by that mental chatter, just as a brass band is drowned out by the sound of a flute in the background. So the more that we can recognize that mental chatter, we can kind of dismiss it, we can separate from it and put our attention on God's wisdom, the more we will be able to get the power to help us to overcome the urges, and with the urges being overcome, so the end of the addiction, the habit. Now here we have the concept of epigenetics. We want to talk about it in the context of a God-centered epigenetics to rewire the brain. Epigenetics is actually a relatively new science. Epi means beyond. Genetics, of course, is our genetic inheritance from our ancestors. And the new science of epigenetics is revealing how the choices that we make can change our genes. This is a quote from the Time magazine article. The choices you make can change your genes and those of your kids. Actually, you can't really change your genes. The genes are an inheritance. But what we can alter, what we can modify is whether or not certain genes are turned on or other genes are turned off, what we refer to as genetic expression. And this is epigenetics, those factors which affect the expression of our genetics in enabling us to turn on those things which are promoting health and healing, and essentially reduce those factors which create an unhealthy or destructive genetic expression. With the help of brain scans, researchers have uncovered new information of how the brain actually responds to religious and spiritual experiences. The brain scans show regions of the brain that become active when devoutly religious study participants have a spiritual experience. So we can see, we can actually map out the various areas of the brain that are being activated, that are being strengthened. And the studies have been conducted in this regard on the role of faith in addiction recovery. After 1 year in faith-based programs, there was a higher success rate than the overall relapse rate of 40 to 60% after 6 months in non-faith-based programs. So again, we can see in this article a positive correlation was found between faith-based therapy and substance abuse recovery when compared with secular therapy. So this is where the research is going more and more, to be able to bring the spiritual reality, the spiritual power into our efforts to rewire the brain, to be able to end the urges. And with the end of the urges is the end of the habit. Now, it turns out that how we think about God specifically affects our brain structure. They're able to see through the brain scans. And I believe it will turn out that the way we look at God, the view we have of God, the opinion or belief that we have about the nature of God, will turn out to be the most important epigenetic factor in terms of genetic expression, meaning in terms of how we're going to overcome our urges, how we're going to strengthen the positive circuitry, how we're going to be able to heal the brain. So we want to ask ourselves a very fundamental question. Do we think of God in a way that's provoking fear? Or do we think of God in a way that inspires gratitude and appreciation? This is a very important question, is our own view of God and how that view is going to affect brain function and brain structure. The research supports the different results based on our view of God. The greatest improvements, meaning the growth in the prefrontal cortex, occurred when research participants meditated specifically on a God of love. Meditated specifically on a God of love. However, the participants worshiping a God other than one of love, a being who is punitive, authoritarian, who inspired in fear circuits, this was activating chronic inflammation and damage to the brain. So this is so important to understand, that the difference in our view of God will affect whether or not we actually have improvement in the prefrontal cortex in terms of healthy brain circuitry, or whether or not we will see, in a fear-based approach to God, a fear-based view of God, chronic inflammation and damage to the brain. Now, the key is the focused attention. The research is really confirming that it's the focus of attention on a God of love that really brings about the greatest changes in brain structure and brain function. That this requires ongoing focused attention. In fact, the brain scans here in Dr. Newberg's book, How God Changes Your Brain, he says, quote, brain scans demonstrate that meditation strengthens a specific circuit that governs a wide variety of functions involved with mental clarity, empathy, compassion, emotional balance, and the suppression of anger and fear. Now, when that particular circuit deteriorates or malfunctions, it contributes to the formation of depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So again, we want to really be able to use the power of epigenetics and the power of neuroplasticity, utilize those concepts through a focused attention on a view of God as a God of love. The Dr. Newberg's research, he actually, in one particular study, developed a 12-minute stress relief meditative practice where you can, 12 minutes a day, actually, think of God, your higher power, Jesus, some quotation from Scripture that holds great meaning for you. And the key is in silently repeating a word or phrase that's meaningful as you reflect on the truth of the words that you're mentally saying over and over. This is, you can try different approaches, you can change aspects of the meditative process as you feel moved to do. But one key ingredient is feeling as much gratitude as possible throughout the process. So again, You want to be able to silently repeat a word or a phrase that's meaningful to you. Thinking about God, God's nature, your higher power, something that allows you to have your focus of attention over a 12-minute time period. And when this is done for even just 30 days, his research, again, quoted in Dr. Jennings' book, he's a psychiatrist who wrote the book, The Aging Brain. Dr. Newberg's research showed that even 65-year-olds and older who meditated on a God of love for just 12 minutes a day for 30 days experienced the following benefits. A growth in the love circuits in that anterior cingulate cortex, again, part of the prefrontal cortex. This was based on MRI scans, lowered heart rates, lower blood pressure, less stress, and a 30% improvement in memory. That is really just very astounding. 30% improvement in memory. Now, if memory is being improved, it means that brain circuitry is being strengthened. It means that neural connections are being strengthened. The ones that are helpful, the ones that are healing, are able to bring about improvement in the higher brain centers and a calming of the lower brain limbic system and amygdala. So we can feel each time that we make this shift from dismissing, from the mental chatter, from the urge, from the feeling that we need to kind of act on our habit, as we dismiss and shift our attention to positive things, to positive qualities, to positive attitudes, mindsets, as we shift our attention to the source of that highest power for goodness, the highest power for health and healing, as we make that shift and let the urge fade and feel the victory, be grateful for what you've been able to accomplish with God's help, the victory that you are experiencing, that victory, each time we dismiss the urge instead of acting on it, it's a victory in terms of strengthening the positive circuitry, weakening the negative circuitry, victory upon victory. You might not always succeed, but again, you just don't allow any kind of mental chatter or any kind of thoughts that are trying to sabotage your efforts. Each moment is a fresh moment to be able to continue to go in the positive direction, in the direction of health and healing, in the direction of your goals. You don't allow any kind of negative mental chatter get in the way, trying to discourage you, telling you you're not going to succeed. Just if it's just making you feel bad, it's not ultimately the truth. The truth is that you have the power, that you can utilize that power, that you can overcome that urge, you can stop acting on the urge, and those negative circuits will diminish. So I want to end with this particular step 3. I know there's a lot here, yet the concept is pretty simple. It's a matter of getting it on a deeper level. And of course, one of the best ways to do it, as Dr. Newberg said, is just devote just the 12 minutes, just 12 minutes a day to a repetitive thought and feeling around something of a spiritual nature that has meaning for you. And just 12 minutes a day, you're helping to heal your brain, to develop those positive circuits and those higher brain centers. So with that, we're going to end this particular session, this video, and in the next we'll conclude the program with a concluding video. And have a wonderful day.